So today we are with Dr. Marco Schiro. You are chargé de recherche at CNRS, and more precisely in the young physics teams called Jeunes Équipes de l'Institut de Physique at Collège de France. You also work for the Theoretical Physics Institute here at Paris-Saclay University. And today we are going to talk about an article entitled Quantum Classical Non-Adiabatic Dynamics of Floquet-Driven Systems. You wrote along with Florian Eich and Federica Agostini.
But first, can you briefly describe your work, your lab, your domain of expertise, please?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. I'm a theoretical physicist. I work for CNRS, as you said, at Collège de France. I'm part of a young team incubator which provides an environment for junior research groups in all areas of physics, theory and experiments. My research activity evolves around the physics of quantum systems in regimes far from thermal equilibrium. This is a situation that arises every time you have a perturbation that acts on your system and bring it away from its minimum energy state, from its ground state, and let it explore highly excited state in the Hilbert space. For example, you can think of electrons in solids which are excited by a laser field, something we will talk about in a second, or qubits in a quantum computer. The aim of my work is trying to find new ways to solve the time-dependent Schrödinger equation for many quantum particles interacting among each other, and try to understand the resulting quantum dynamics.
In the paper we discussed today, you applied the Floquet theory to a periodically driven non-adiabatic problem. So first question, what does Floquet theory bring to that problem? And maybe more generally, what is the domain of application of Floquet theory?
Okay, so the idea of the project that led to this paper was trying to understand and make progress in the modeling of electron coupled to nuclei and driven out of equilibrium by a classical light field, which can be, for example, a laser exciting the electrons in your system. And this is in general a very difficult problem to solve because electrons and nuclei interact among each other and because you have a time-dependent perturbation. So, of course, to make progress, you have to make a certain approximation. And the first approximation we made is to assume that the external perturbation is completely periodic in time. Of course, this is an idealization of a real experimental situation in which you want to have a pulse that has a finite duration, but you can think of it as a good starting point if the time scale of your system is much shorter than the duration of the pulse. The main advantage of using this time periodic assumption is that one can use and unleash the power of Floquet theory. So, let me first discuss a little bit about what Floquet theory is about, and then I'll come back to discuss what this brings in our project. So, in fact, Floquet theory is a very general results that apply to quantum mechanical systems that are described by time-dependent Hamiltonian, which is periodic in time. In fact, this result goes back to a French mathematician, Gustave Floquet, which studied differential equation, and in fact this is a result that applies to any first-order linear differential equation with periodic coefficients, and the time-dependent Schrödinger equation is just one example of that. And the power of Floquet theorem is that it allows us to get a lot of information about the structure of the solution of the Schrödinger equation just by knowing that the Hamiltonian is periodic in time. What this means is that Floquet theorem tells us that the solution of the Schrödinger equation, if the Hamiltonian is periodic, is almost periodic, meaning it's periodic times phase factor, and this structure of this solution form a complete set in the space of solution of the Schrödinger equation. And so this Floquet eigenstate play a role that is very similar to your good old eigenstate and eigenvalue in quantum mechanics. If you remember your quantum mechanics course, you know that you have to solve the time-dependent Schrödinger equation, but as a matter of fact, if the Hamiltonian is time-independent, you never do that. You make an ansatz that is a stationary kind of solution, and you just diagonalize the Hamiltonian and find the eigenvalues and the eigenvectors, because if you know that, you can reconstruct the time dynamics starting from any state, because the Schrödinger equation is linear. And Floquet theorem does the same thing for you in the most general case of a time-periodic Hamiltonian. So this is rather remarkable because solving time-dependent quantum mechanics in general is very difficult. We don't have exact solution in very few cases, and the periodic case is one of the few. Using Floquet theorem, in fact, you can do even more. You can kind of forget about time dependence, and you can recast the time-dependent Schrödinger equation into a sort of linear algebra problem of finding eigenvalues and eigenvector of an enlarged matrix that lives in the Hilbert space of your problem, plus an extended space of Floquet harmonics.
So, now, I'm going to ask you a double question. So first, can you briefly describe the model that you studied?
So in this paper, we first developed the general formalism to describe electron coupled to nuclei in presence of a periodic drive, and then we applied it to a specific one-dimensional model that described a double-well system. So this is like two electronic levels, let's call it S0 and S1, with a potential energy surface that describes a double well. So you have two displaced parabola and a coupling between these two states that we model as a Gaussian. The Hamiltonian of the electrons depend parametrically from the nuclear coordinate, and we're going to evolve the system, the electron with their own Hamiltonian and the nuclear dynamics coupled to it. Basically what we want to understand is how the dynamics depend on the strength of the drive. So we consider two cases, the weak drive and the strong drive. And we look at different observables both in the electronic sector. So, for example, we look at the population of the Floquet diabatic state to see how many of those states are populated during the dynamics. And we look also at the nuclear wave function to see how this nuclear wave function evolved with time. And the physics of this problem is that we initialize the system in the ground state of the left well, and we see that the dynamics driven by the drive some population transfer between the ground state, electronic ground state, and the first excited state. And this population transfer is coupled to a dynamics of the nuclear wave packet, which kind of explore different portion of this double well potential, starting from the left well and exploring larger values of the nuclear coordinate. And also, it's important to mention that we consider a light matter coupling that is described in the dipole approximation. So we have a dipole moment that depends linearly on the coordinate of the nuclei, and a perfectly harmonic cosine-like perturbation that never ends, which is the periodic perturbation in time.
Okay. So, as you just said, you studied a two-situation problem with a weak field and a strong field. So we would like to know, why do the results seem to be better in the strong field case and then in the weak field case? Could you especially comment on figure 5 and 10?
Okay, so this is an excellent question, and in fact is one of the key point that we find in this work is how the dynamics change when you increase the amplitude of the drive. So if you look at figure 5 and figure 10, what we are showing here is the density of the nuclear wave packet, and we are comparing the exact quantum dynamics that we can just obtain by numerically solving the time-dependent Schrödinger equation without the coupled trajectory approach, and we compare these exact dynamics with the trajectories. Okay, so in the weak field case, you see that essentially the nuclear wave packet remains more or less close to the initial value, to the minimum of the left well, and there is a little bit of population of the trajectories which kind of drift away, exploring high values of the nuclear coordinate, and in this case, the trajectories remains, I would say, close to the main center of mass of the exodynamics, and this small extension of trajectory is not really captured. On the other hand, when the drive amplitude is much stronger, we see that the entire center of mass of the trajectory shift and drift apart, and the system is way more out of equilibrium and explore different portion of the landscape. In this case, the trajectories seem to work much better, as you said. So to understand that, I think it's important to remember the way we solve the nuclear dynamics to begin with. It's a quantum classical approach, which means that you take your wave function, your nuclear wave function, and you represent it in terms of trajectories, of classical trajectories. And then you sample the trajectory according to their probability distribution. So in a certain sense, this method works better when your probability, in the region where the probability is peaked, because this is just more probable. And the kind of tail of the distribution, which describes kind of rare events in which the nuclear wave packet kind of drift away, are more difficult to capture with the sampling. So in the weak case, the drive is small, and so there is a tiny fraction of this density which drift apart, and it's not easy to capture. We see that if we increase the number of the cutoff in the problem, which describes the number of harmonics, of Floquet harmonics we keep, this effect is captured, although it's not exactly reproduced. In the strong field case, instead, the effect is much stronger, and so the probability distribution is peaked throughout this kind of extension of the nuclear wave function. So the sampling works better. And so I think this is the main reason why the two approaches perform differently in the case of weak drive or in the case of strong drive. But I would say that this is a very good question again, and this is something that we really want to understand in the future, how this approach works as you change further the drive, the frequency of the drive, the amplitude of the drive, and so on.
So you were just talking about the future of this paper. So can you envisage future application or future developments of this study?
So absolutely, I think this is just the first application of this idea of merging Floquet techniques with methods developed to study electron and nuclear dynamics. So we have several ideas to push this project further. I told you already that there is a lot of flexibility in choosing the basis in which you expand your electronic wave function. So one first thing we want to do is to compare this diabatic basis, Floquet diabatic basis, with what is called the Floquet adiabatic basis, which means basically that the drive, the external perturbation, is included in the wave function that you use as a basis set. And we think this could have some important impact in the way the method performs, for example, at strong drive fields. Another interesting application is to relax this idea of a perfectly continuous wave perturbation that, as I said, is a little bit an idealization of theorists. In a real experiment, any light pulse would have some finite duration with some cycle in between. So we would like to extend this idea and this Floquet technique also to this context. This, I would say, is kind of challenging. We have probably to rethink a little bit of the approach, but I think we have already on the right track. And I would say more generally, there is a lot of interest at the moment in driven quantum matter, in driven quantum mechanical system, with the idea of using light and perturbation due to electromagnetic field to change the properties of matter, to induce phase transition, to change the chemical reactions. This is something that is interesting in various domains. On my hand, I would say I'm a condensed matter theorist, let's say, in the heart, so I really hope to use this technique for studying models of electrons coupled to phonons. This is something that I'm very interested in, and I hope to convince Dr. Agostini that this is also an interesting problem where we can use Floquet theory and merge it with these coupled trajectories. And that's it. I think this is going to be fun.
So, thank you for coming on our set.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for answering all our questions.
Thank you very much.